You're listening to the Virtue Podcast, brought to you by the Great Hearts Institute. Good conversations around the great conversation. Welcome back to the Virtue Podcast. I'm Robert Jackson of the Great Hearts Institute, and today we're going to continue to revisit some themes and content that we experienced at Symposium 2023. These are things that were particularly interesting to our 800 attendees. We had a leadership track, which garnered a lot of interest from the audience. I think this reveals that there's need for more research, certainly more preparation around classical school leadership. And so today we're going to be joined by two of my colleagues who've been working in classical education for more than a decade. I personally have had the honor of knowing them both for nearly 10 years. And we're going to take a look at the issues, the concerns of leaders and their work cultivating and managing talent. So let me begin. Erik Twist is the principal partner and president of Arcadia Education. From 2008 to 2022, Erik helped build Great Hearts Academies into the largest network of charter schools in the country. He served as the president from 2017 to 2022, and he's been a member of the Arizona State Board of Charter Schools, Arizona Charter School Association. He has degrees from Trinity and Oxford universities, and he studied politics, theology, and philosophy, which I suspect provides a trifecta of understanding to undergird what he's doing with classical liberal arts education. And he's joined by Lauren Grudem, who also worked at Great Hearts. After graduating from Hillsdale College with degrees in history and German, she has served as classroom teacher, a new faculty orientation teacher trainer, network instructional coach, dean of instruction. She's done pretty much everything, including the design of a teacher apprenticeship program. Lauren completed graduate study in classical education at the University of Dallas and now works as an expert consultant with Arcadia and with Erik. So in preparing for the podcast, I realized, hey, we've got it all right here. This is the expertise we need. The two of you today in this conversation, welcome.
It's good to be here, Rob. It's good to see you again.
Thank you for having us.
You know, a lot of us around these parts are fond of quoting John Senior's aphorism, a school is a faculty. Now, there is profundity in that pithy statement, right? But I think I want to unpack that a little bit further with you all, because as you well know, it's the talented teachers and staff that are essential to these classical schools. How does a leader and how does the leadership team go about finding and recruiting the kind of teachers that they need? Just begin with the rubric. What are we looking for?
Well, it's a huge question. Again, thank you for having us on. You know, we've been thinking about just that particular question for some time now. You know, there's in that senior quote, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a school leader that didn't agree with it or didn't fundamentally understand that at the end of the day, and this is especially true within classical education. I mean, it's true everywhere, but you know, we can get caught up sometimes within the classical ed world of thinking that the foundational element of the school or the most important thing that designates us as classical is a reading list or a curricular or a pedagogical method. And I think what Senior's really getting at there, and why we're excited to talk about the practical application of all of this today, what Senior's really getting at there is that at the end of the day, if you want to know what a school really believes, what it really is putting forward, you know, what its culture is ultimately about, and whether or not it's going to be successful in imparting the tradition to students in its intellectual, aesthetic, moral elements, it fundamentally comes down to who are the adults in the room with them, right? What is their intellectual, aesthetic, and moral life like, right? Because we know that you can put into the hands of let's say, this is probably putting it too harshly, but bad people or let's say underdeveloped souls or teachers. You can put into their hands the best stuff, but it won't be used well, right? You can give them the best tools, but that doesn't mean that they'll know how to wield them. In fact, you know, plenty of people have been given the classical tools and yet have still come out ill-formed, malnourished in a sense, intellectually, aesthetically, and morally. And so the best leaders within the classical tradition understand that they must obsess about who they're putting in the classroom. But it isn't enough, and this gets to your question, it isn't enough to just carry that sentiment around, right? You have to figure out the way to operationalize, to consider the processes that are necessary to attracting the best people to your school, and then adjudicating whether or not they're people that you want to hire. And then there are a bunch of things that come after that. So the rubric that we use at Arcadia is not proprietary necessarily. These are, in fact, the first sort of contours of this I remember learning from our good friend James Felton, who's with the Table Group. But there's that old adage of hire slowly, fire fast, right? And we've got classical educators saying, well, it should be fire quickly. But hire slowly, fire fast. And we've sort of taken this approach and said, okay, what are the things in between those? And how do you think systematically, how do you think from an operational standpoint, from a step-by-step process standpoint, how do you think about each one of those activities? And so for us, we designate them as kind of 5 movements. Hire slowly, obviously, and we want to dig into the elements that make that up. Onboard comprehensively, resource intentionally, review consistently, and then fire or promote quickly. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so that's the way in which we kind of spell this out with the people that we work with, and helping school leaders to think clearly about what each one of those kind of verticals or key elements requires in terms of how you document and how you prepare to be successful in each one of those areas, so that you're not only attracting the very best people to your school, but you're retaining them, right? Mm-hmm. That they like being there and they want to continue to do the work for the long haul.
Erik, just repeat those quickly for us, the 5, and let's walk through them. I'm going to ask Lauren a couple of questions specifically about one or more of them. So the first one again, hire slowly.
Yep. Onboard comprehensively. Resource intentionally. Review consistently. And then some would say fire quickly, but we would just say fire or promote.
That's right. Got it.
Or praise gratuitously.
Praise quickly. Yeah. And substantively.
Sure. So, Lauren, you've been on a leadership team, and when you go about this process, and if you do slow down, where are you going to find these people? And how are you going to bring them around in this process to discern if they are indeed the right fit for your school?
Yes. Well, I'd say most simply in like-minded communities. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes that is at universities or colleges who have similar anthropological, theological, sometimes beliefs. But other times it's in even smaller communities. I think of churches, I think of reading groups, I think of different academic associations, some formal, some informal. So I think that as we think about resourcing these sorts of people, the people that are attracted to teach in a classical school, I do think that we need to broaden our understanding of what and where these communities are. They aren't just at universities or colleges. So we really need to think carefully about, okay, the people that I am seeking, the people that value and love these particular things, where do they congregate? And then going and fishing in those particular pools, some of which will be small.
Lauren, could you give me just a couple of examples, right, from your time at the school where you worked and administered, where you found the like-minded communities?
So there were a few times where we sourced from from the parent community, but parents who had maybe been in the classroom but then left to raise children, to sometimes homeschool. There were times where we sourced candidates through through friendships, through reading groups. I mentioned those earlier, through church or religious church affiliations or religious groups. So there were a number of times where we found it helpful to go through these, or to search in these smaller pools.
Sure. What's so interesting to me about the 5 elements here in this this process is just how much emphasis is placed on the cultivation of the teacher. So there's a discernment process, obviously, in the slow and methodical approach to identifying who should join the team. But essentially 2, 3, 4, and of course 5 all pertain to how the cultivation of the faculty is at the heart of the school. So perhaps we could talk just for a little bit about how leadership teams may need to rethink or either alter their approach, both to recruitment, but also to this orientation and the ongoing cultivation of the faculty, if they want to maximize their effectiveness, getting to the right people. Tell me a little bit more, either one of you, how do we have to tell leadership, work through this process with leadership teams to really alter the way they may be doing business at present from what you've seen?
Well, Lauren, you could jump into. I think that one of the first things that leaders have to come to understand is what we talked about at the beginning, that you are not making a mistake if you are putting significant resources, time and money into the attraction and the hiring and then the development of your faculty. And I think that there are a number of ways in which leaders tend to get tripped up in that. And Lauren's seen that firsthand as a teacher, and obviously is developing teachers. She can talk about that extensively. But one of the first things that I think leaders need to be doing is considering what their sort of external brand is. So that when we think about the hiring process, right, we're not just thinking about the moment you take an application. When we say hire slowly, there's a whole bunch of pre-work, right, that leaders need to be thinking about, institutions need to be thinking about. Whether or not you're a mom and pop, small, rural Christian school in Iowa, or if you're a big charter network like Great Hearts, there are activities that need to pre-exist before you can be successful in bringing the right talent into your institution. And so we talk with leaders all the time about making sure that your web presence, just as one example, is one that's solving for not just parents coming in to understand what your school is about, but do you have elements there that are attractive and that answer questions for prospective candidates, teaching candidates, and staff? Have you looked at your web presence through that lens as a prospective colleague? And so working through even something as simple as your teacher bio pages, right? That there's stories that you're telling about who would I be working with? What type of people would I be working with were I to join this particular school? Thinking about that not just from the parent perspective, but from the teacher perspective, I think is just one little piece of what school leaders can do to create the conditions where they can be successful in attracting talent to their institution. Now, as we kind of move through, and this will all be very high level, Rob. We won't have enough time to go through all of this. But when we think about each one of these pillars, let's call them, of talent management, they're all interconnected. So if you're creating the right conditions to attract talent to at least apply, then thinking about what that application process looks like, how long should it take, a process that honors the person that's applying, a process that is deliberate about asking the right questions in the right cadence and the right sequence, giving opportunities not only for you to ascertain whether or not this candidate is a good fit, but also giving the candidate opportunities to start to, in a sense, fall in love with you and the community, and to start to see themselves as being a part of that community. Because when you're hiring somebody into a school, you're hiring them in many ways into a very sacred and intimate thing. You're hiring them into a kind of family. And this is again why ensuring that they see those elements of what they're entering, and that you've thought about giving them opportunities to get a glimpse of what it would be to be part of that group, that intimate thing. But that type of sort of hospitality component that we think about in the hiring process is something I think a lot of leaders overlook. Right? They're busy, right? So efficiency gets in the way of intimacy. And I think you in a micro sense, maybe it feels like you're doing the right things because you have all this stuff going on. But over the sort of macro look of the impact that has, it actually ends up being less efficient on the whole. That the more that you think about hiring as a participation in a slightly inefficient human connection process where you're trying to build deep relationships, the more that you think about making that as efficient as it can be without violating the understanding that what you're really trying to draw into your ranks is a person, right? Who's going to be, part of the community. And so, Lauren, I don't know if you have any sort of anecdotes or further insight there, but that's one thing that in the hire slowly phase, we're really trying to get leaders to understand that you've got to create an environment where people feel welcomed and brought into something that is more than just a job.
Yeah. Lauren, I did want to ask, and probably it is anecdotal, but either from your experience personally, right, as you were hired, as you were brought into a classical school, or because you were involved in the process, I love this word of hospitality. This is the right word, I think. What experiences of hospitality did you have, or did you attempt to create for those who you were considering?
That's a great question. I think if I start with what I experienced, I so appreciated the time and the space that was given to build relationships with those in the school, with those in the community early on, taking into account that we were people. We weren't just, we didn't just have to check off our checklist of things that needed to be learned or understood before the first day of school, but there was time to just be together and consider ideas, consider maybe readings together. But there was space created from the outset just to be together. And so as I, after that initial experience being welcomed into the school community, and then living as a part of the faculty for a number of years before being on the other side and wanting to really curate that experience for incoming faculty, my understanding of the importance of the relational aspect of onboarding only increased. So as a headmaster, a head of school, but also as a leadership team, you really do, kind of going with this metaphor of hospitality, you are setting the conditions for, you could think of it as a dinner party. You are the host. So you're curating who is at the dinner table. And then you're also providing fodder for intellectual friendship and maybe even spiritual friendship, for these people to to come together and commune. You yourself are not and should not be the sole source of the sole source of all nourishment at the table. And so you do play a critical role in providing and in curating the nourishment that is on the table. And so as I stepped into a role where I was inviting people into that community and spending time with them, especially in those early days, I really wanted to afford time for people to be people together, and to acknowledge that being invited into a community is not just practical or philosophical, cultural, but an aspect of that cultural piece is the relational aspect. And no one person can bring anyone into a new culture. It's a community, it's a communal task. And so the entire leadership team, but also the whole faculty, is involved in this invitation, this hosting, this inculturation that needs to happen as you onboard new faculty.
This is fascinating because obviously both of you have been involved in leadership. You've been in the classroom, you've been in leadership, you've seen and experienced what is most valuable, what has really touched you and drawn you in and drawn you deeper into the promotion of these classical communities. And so I would really love some very practical examples, if you could, around how onboarding, what we call orientation, and that development, that sort of holistic development of individual teachers, but teachers, as you just said, Lauren, who are existing within a community, right? They're not working, even though they may have a single classroom in the grammar school, they are still a part of a larger community, a faculty, as we said at the outset. Give the viewers of our podcast today some more examples of how the orientation and the ongoing development of teachers manifests in a school in a regular way, in a way that's just a part of the rhythm, the warp and woof, right?
You want to take that, Lauren?
Sure. So I think when we talk about onboarding, we need to acknowledge the fact that it's a complex set of tasks, and it's a complex period. It is not it's not over on day one, or the day that the students enter the classroom. The high and lofty goal of onboarding is the intellectual, moral, social, and at times spiritual incorporation of people into this community. And the hope is that when someone is fully onboarded and enculturated into this community, they can execute their roles and responsibilities. They can fulfill their roles, execute their responsibilities within the confines of, or the guidelines set forth by the school, but also to the best of their abilities. And so we need to acknowledge that there's a hierarchy of goals at play, and they're not all going to be met on day one, and they're not all going to be met even at the last day of the first year. And so we need to begin to prioritize, all right, well, what is important for day one? What is important by the end of the first semester, and what can wait a little bit longer? So when it comes to thinking through what is important at different times, I would say we need to identify in each of those areas I mentioned. So the practical aspect of onboarding, the relational, the philosophical, cultural, what is the most important in each of those areas, what's important in each of those areas to happen before the first day of school, and then as we go throughout the year.
Rob, one of the things that we tell leaders is, and Lauren gets to this, in terms of thinking about the time that it takes to help people really become part of the community, and there's sort of there are things that leaders should be doing in that hiring phase that set you up to onboard well. And so the types of questions that you're asking that lead to the type of documentation that you would get about each individual person that's going to enter your community and the role that they have within the community, right? The expectations that they're going to have. That one of the things that we miss so often in the way that we're attracting people or bringing people onto the team is we miss drilling down into understanding how or making clear with everybody, what are the expectations that they're going to have, whether or not they're a kindergarten teacher or they're going to be teaching 11th grade music or physics or all the different elements of responsibilities that one might have within an academic institution. That we've got to be, as leaders, clear about the expectations that the position that we're hiring for, what's levied upon the person holding that position. Do we understand and have we set up a process that identifies whether or not or what parts of or what elements, what aspects of those expectations is this candidate prepared to meet? What are there gaps that they have, right, where they're going to need support in meeting those expectations? And over what period of time do we think we should expect them to meet those expectations? So if the hiring process isn't set up to start to adjudicate or to identify the gaps that candidates are going to have in meeting the expectations that are going to be levied upon them in the position that we're giving them, we've already set ourselves up to do onboarding in a way that is not as complete, not as comprehensive, not as full, and not as honoring to the person that's again entering the position. And so the hiring process sets you up for the onboarding process, and that onboarding again is like Lauren said, it's got to have all these practical elements that go back to the hospitality piece. Have you solve for when they show up? Are they going to know where they're to go, and how do they use the copy machine, and what are the rules in the teacher's lounge, and is there a calendar of events that they're aware of, and where do they get what resources? I mean, all of that stuff should be written down, mapped out, and clear. But there should be within the onboarding process also a conversation with the new colleague, again, making clear what the expectations are of the role, and a beginning conversation around, here's what we've identified, the areas of support that you're going to need. And that then rolls you into the resourcing part, right? So if you've hired well and prepared yourself to have clear conversations and clear expectations with your new colleague, you now are going to be able to build a resourcing plan that is directed at the actual needs of the person that you have in the position that they're expected to perform, and the duties that they're expected to perform. And so you can see how the onboarding plays into this resourcing role, that you're giving a clear understanding to new colleagues about what's expected of them and how you're going to give them the resources to meet those expectations. Because we cannot hold people accountable if we're first not clear about what we expect them to do, and then clear about how we're going to give them what they need to meet those expectations. And that must be documented. And each person on your team is going to have a different plan. There are general things that people need to learn. I mean, if you do Love and Logic, or you teach Spalding phonics, or things, there are elements that everybody who's joining the teaching team may need to learn individually. But there are other aspects about them and the qualities that they bring, the experience that they bring, that great leaders are digging into, and then building personalized professional development plans that are meant to support their success. Right? And so being very disciplined about that process, mapping that out and making sure that things are being documented, you can see how much that can actually accelerate your ability to support, to guide, and to care for your teachers if you really build a clear process by which you're identifying, documenting, and then supporting teachers along the way.
That makes really good sense, because as you have described this fivefold process, I recognize that the very humane and personalized approach that you're taking is going to be attentive to those differences, even the idiosyncrasies of individuals. And as such, is going to permit the team and the school leader to be responsive, to sort of tailor, if you will, a response and the development or the resourcing of each and every faculty member. But I say that and then realize, I'm sure, given the number of years you both collectively have been doing this, that there are some times where you run into a thorny patch, so to speak, in the development of your faculty, in the ongoing growth and cultivation of that faculty. Let's talk about that for a minute, because I'm pretty sure that's where a lot of our listeners and viewers are probably wondering, what's the rub? How do we deal with the tough ones? Tell us about some of those thorny issues that you're going to address.
Well, I mean, to sort of beat a dead horse here, most school leaders hit those thorny patches because they didn't do the pre-work. Everything that we were talking about, we are hitting really all of this at the highest level.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
Lauren and I have tons of, we digging in at higher resolution around all these practical things and what they look like in the documentation of them all. But again, if school leaders aren't doing the work, and a lot aren't, because it's hard, but doing the work of clearly articulating what the expectations of the role that someone is entering, and then building a very clear and collaborative resourcing plan, professional development plan. All of that makes it possible then to build an evaluation rubric, right? That's agreed to, that's clear, and that both parties can commit to say, these are the expectations that are levied upon you in this position. We are resourcing you, right? We're not just throwing you in and wishing you the best, right? We have made clear to you what we expect. We have worked collaboratively together to identify what are the gaps that you have and what are the resources that you'll need to meet those expectations, which then makes it much easier, because it's not in the abstract, it's not left to subjectivity. We've made it very clear how we're going to evaluate. What does success look like? And you feel, hopefully, through that process, that you have been, the leader's been truthful with you about what's being expected. They've given you what you need in order to meet those expectations. And because of that, it's clear then what success is going to look like. Yeah. And that gets us into that next pillar, the fourth one of review consistently. So this is another area where leaders really start to falter. But because they're not doing the pre-work of having clear conversations and documentation around the things that we just talked about, it makes it really hard, almost impossible to do accountability. And so because the lanes aren't clear, the expectations aren't clear, right? People haven't been resourced. And so there are a lot of leaders, we think, that actually avoid going in and reviewing because there isn't clear commitment between the two parties about what's being reviewed, how it's being reviewed, how things are being documented. And when that starts to take place over time, that problem metastasizes into what we see so often in schools, where you've got leaders who sort of behind the curtain will talk about, well, so-and-so we know is a problem. And it's gotten to a point we need to get rid of them. And maybe they go seek legal support or HR support. And it always seems to be the case that, the HR expert or the legal expert will say, well, have you told them? Have you had that conversation? Was it clear to them what you expected? Did you document any of this? Were there ever moments where you laid out and in written form and in collaborative spirit what the expectations were? And was it clear to them how often you would be reviewing them? And did you ever have conversations with them about where you thought they were missing the mark? And so often what we have are people that prevent themselves, and this slows the entire process down. They prevent themselves from being able to move quickly on what they need to do, either the hard conversation, right, the termination, or to know how to elevate people, to praise them, and to promote them to more leadership, because they haven't actually done all of the tedious but important work of documenting, resourcing, reviewing. And so we find that people end up being paralyzed by this. And bad teachers remain. Great teachers get frustrated because people aren't being held accountable. Parents end up seeing that there are weaknesses in the school. But it isn't necessarily because the leader doesn't see the problem. It's that the leader has not set up the conditions where they can deal with it. And that takes operational discipline. And so anyway, that's
I think that makes perfect sense. I'm wondering, especially given your work, Lauren, with that teacher apprenticeship program, this notion that we must be, and that leaders are responsible for observing and providing that consistent feedback. What's a timetable here? How often should that new teacher, that novice teacher, be observed and evaluated, but not with any sort of heavy-handedness, but simply the ongoing conversation around the responsibilities and expectations, but also to understand where they're at, how they're doing in the classroom? What's the frequency?
I would say, if you can, every week, but at least for a new teacher, every other week. And these can be brief pop-ins. You don't have to be in there for the whole class period, or an hour or whatever it is, but it can be 10 to 15 minutes. And I know that it can sound overwhelming if you're thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to be in these classrooms every week and these classrooms every other week? This cannot be one person's responsibility.
Right.
Not every coaching session or piece of learning on the behalf of a new teacher has to happen with the handholding of the head of school. Leverage the experience and the wisdom that you have at your school. And so there are master teachers, there are mentors who can really skillfully guide and walk alongside a new teacher in a lot of the common classroom management, instructional, disciplinary issues that a new teacher is going to come up against. So I would say at minimum every other week, but at the beginning of the year, a weekly pop-in is preferable.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying here, Lauren, that there's value to bringing that peer-to-peer, that teacher-to-teacher relationship into play, so that the head of school is not the only one, and certainly not the sole observer, but that there's a real community conversing around the quality of instruction and the types of classrooms that we're trying to promote. Well, here's a trick. Go ahead, Lauren, please.
I would also add to that, especially for newer teachers, because teaching is an art. There are a lot of ways to do it well. There are also a lot of ways to do it poorly. And so we talk a lot in classical ed about learning through imitation. In learning this art of teaching, it is so valuable to see other people do it, to go and observe other teachers with different personalities, with different experience levels, do this thing that you're trying to learn how to do. And so I say that just to say, this is a low-hanging tool that we as school leaders can employ to improve the instruction in the classroom.
Yeah.
Having teachers go and observe, carving out time for new teachers to go and do that on a regular basis, and then simply talk through with them after the fact. What did you notice? Why do you think that happened the way it did? Yeah.
That's incredibly important, because the fact that a novice teacher could see a master at work has to be built into the schedule, right? If you've got the novice teacher completely booked from 7 to 3 in the afternoon, they won't have that opportunity, but you're going to carve that out. That's going to be an intentional piece of the schedule, from what I hear you saying.
Yes.
I'm interested because you've hinted at it, Erik, that there may be school leaders who really are in over their heads. They're not able to bring this type of atmosphere, this type of process to play, or they're not, for whatever reasons, embracing it. So it's a tricky question, but what advice would you give to a teacher in a classical school who wants to grow and develop within this community, but senses the leader is not equipped, not capable of cultivating the faculty? Do you have any advice for them?
Oh boy, that is a tricky one. There's so many assumptions, right, that have to be made in order to know what the right kind of wise or prudential path would be. I mean, assuming that there's a healthy culture, one of trust and where people can be vulnerable with one another and be honest. I mean, the best thing to do is always to call it out, right, and to offer insight from the classroom about what would make the classroom experience, both for the teacher and for the students, better. Right? What are the things that the teacher has identified that they need that need to be that need to be built at the operational or systems level? That there are that the way that the leadership team is allocating their time, if it feels that it is too heavy in areas that aren't focused on what's taking place in the classroom, which, by the way, I mean, we hinted at this, but we hear this, Lauren and I hear this all the time from people that we work with, that there just isn't enough time to get into the classroom, right? There isn't enough time to allow teachers to do what Lauren just described, that there isn't enough time. And really what all this really reveals is a misunderstanding of where time should be allocated, right? What's most important in terms of the limited time that we have. What's happening in the classroom, what the teacher is able to do as a pedagogue is the promise, right? It is ultimately the very purpose of the institution. Is what's taking place in that classroom, the relationship that's happening between teacher and student, and again, not just knowledge transfer, but in a classical environment, the moral formation that's taking place, and the just the environment itself, and what it's cultivating in the hearts and minds of the students in the teacher's care. That's the promise that a classical school goes out into the market with, and protecting that promise is preeminent. And so if one's calendar isn't leaning heavily towards protecting that promise and cultivating it in ever more beautiful ways, then the leader's time is misappropriated. And so I think that if the culture is good, being able to bring that up in a meeting, doing that either privately or at a faculty meeting, I think is warranted. If that's not possible, if you're a teacher and you're in an environment where there isn't any interest in working through what it means to better serve the teacher in the day-to-day activities that the expectations that have been levied upon them, like we spoke about earlier, you got to find another school. Schools that don't understand that the primary purpose is that activity, that, well, let's say the relationship between teacher and student, and aren't committed to guarding that and supporting it. Those are schools that ultimately are not going to be healthy for the best teachers. And it would be important to identify that, to understand it, and then to move on.
That's the difficult, but real, a real truth, right, that we must confront. I want to give you both one last question, in part because, again, the expertise that you bring to this conversation is of great importance. But oftentimes we just need to distill it down. We need to be able to, as Senior did with his pithy formulation, describe what it is that we're aiming for. So if you were to provide a piece of counsel, a piece of advice to a leader or a leadership team in relation to cultivating their school's faculty, what one piece of advice would you give, Lauren?
I think I would focus on the relational aspect of being part of this community of learners, this faculty. The fact that we as administrators need to carve out time for people to be people with one another, to learn from one another, to not make the learning overly programmatic. Yes, we do need to have individualized professional development plans, but there's a lot that can be gleaned in the example I gave earlier of just going and watching someone else teach, watching someone interact with a student during a difficult moment, or on the faculty side, sharing a meal together. Those are things that can very easily feel like, oh, I just don't have time for that. We have so many boxes to check. Those are the things that are enriching and life-giving to these people who are part of this community, who have chosen classical education for a reason. The relational aspect is often of higher value than it might be in some other communities, and so we can't neglect that.
Well said, Lauren. Erik, what counsel would you provide us?
I think it comes down to, I mean, I guess to repeat myself, but the student culture is always downstream of the adult culture. And so leaders must obsess about how are they cultivating that adult culture. And so when we talk about the 5 pillars of talent management within this context, that hiring slowly, onboarding comprehensively, resourcing, gratuitously or intentionally, reviewing consistently, and then firing or promoting quickly, that all of that is meant to provide a framework for doing what Senior talked about, which is to make sure that you understand that your faculty ultimately is the final determinant of what your school is going to cultivate in the hearts and minds of students. And so again, it's not enough. It's not enough to just say the things right. It's not enough to have a beautiful vision and mission. Classical schools have got to be the best in class when it comes to attracting and cultivating the right adult culture within their schools, and they've got to do that in deliberate, systematic, and disciplined ways. And I think they will find that in doing that, not only do they certainly meet the wisdom that Senior brings in his pithy little aphorism, but I think they'll find that they love the work again. And so that's what we want, right? We want vibrant cultures. We want places where the adults are full of joy, and that they enter into the classroom with such a spirit that the children are excited to engage in the rigor that a classical school demands of them. But you don't get that by just choosing the right curriculum or having the right reading list or getting really great at the Socratic method. You must have men and women who are aligned around the vision, who are cared for, where things are clear, and as Lauren said, whose relationships have been taken seriously and solved for, right, throughout the year. And in doing that, right, you will love them well, and in loving your adults well and loving your colleagues well, you will ultimately love the children.
Well, you have both certainly offered us a vision of a more excellent way, a very practical and more excellent way, I might add. And I appreciate so much the time you've spent with us today. And I look forward to this conversation continuing. Thank you both.
Well, thank you, Rob. It's great being here.